this Project 2025 is trying to ensure happens is that the agency be weaponized basically under the president's discretion. So if the president feels like, this individual should be investigated with or without merit, it could happen because under this doctrine or under this policy agenda, this department would lose its ability to operate independently. Now people would want to know why, like why was the Department of Justice, why is the FBI named in this? Many of you remember, or maybe you don't, know that the Department of Justice did an investigation on alleged Russia and Trump collusion. They've also investigated Comey when he was in the FBI. And so the point is, if the president says, I want you to investigate this without question, it's going to happen. And moving the Department of Justice from its independent lens underneath the executive branch under the White House will give the president the authority to basically use the department at his or her free will. And so it's important to know that these new reforms that the Heritage Foundation would hope that would happen would basically increase the Department of Justice oversight by the White House instead of the other way around. And so it's basically kind of like reversing the checks and balances, reversing the separation of power. Another thing that's important to note is DOJ by nature is not a partisan organization. So it does not matter whether the current president in office is considered Democrat, Independent, or Republican. They have the sole authority to basically uphold the law of the United States. And so under the Project 2025, DOJ wouldn't, if it's no longer going to operate as an independent entity, and it will be transformed under the arm of the president's agenda, that means that the entity will now be responsible for enforcing the policies and investigations that they would deem contradictory to the administration's goal. And so what that's doing is politicizing the department. And it didn't just extend to the DOJ, it's also extending to the FBI. The FBI would now become the new armed enforcement component of the White House. Typically that's handled, many of you know, the Secret Service has a hand in that, but this is extending the FBI to really be the armed enforcement component of the White House, and also giving them the authority to take over local law enforcement duties if the administration believes that local crime is not being adequately addressed. So let's let's rewind back to, many of you know, the crime bill that happened in the 90s, where disparate treatment and enforcement of Black communities happened. And you fast forward to today, you have our local law enforcement, you have our district attorneys, you have more of a collaboration happening to try to reverse the impact of those crimes that have disparately impacted certain demographics. Well, what Project 2025 would allow is for the DOJ to come in and to reverse those reforms that we are seeing happening today to address police brutality, to address misuse or excessive enforcement, to address law enforcement officers killing people while in custody. And so some of those vehicles that we see today, many of you may have heard the term consent decree. Well, under this project, the Heritage Foundation wants to make sure there's a plan to eliminate consent decrees and legal settlements between the Department of Justice and local law enforcement departments. So what happens is when a local law enforcement department has been found to been operating in a manner that is unjust, the Department of Justice, through the court system, will implement what's a consent decree, which is a list of reforms that local law enforcement agencies have to do to bring them back into code, so to speak, in terms of eliminating or rectifying patterns of misconduct, excessive force, civil rights violations within the agency. So many of you know, if you live in Baltimore, Baltimore City had a consent decree because of the situation that happened with the death of Freddie Gray while he was in police custody. So under Project 2025, those consent decrees would go out the door. And any other type of reform that's happening in any other local law enforcement jurisdiction to try to remedy the effects of misconduct would go out the window. The last thing I'll talk about, which is very, very important, which we're already seeing attacks on through the Supreme Court's decision to remove affirmative action. The DOJ has a civil rights division. And so if anyone feels like that their rights have been violated, whether by their employer or by the school district or what have you, you go to the DOJ and you file a civil rights complaint. Well, under this Project 2025, they are aiming to refocus, and that's the terminology that is used, the division's efforts, shifting away from affirmative action and actually prosecuting and targeting organizations that have been found to have operated under affirmative discrimination. This is the terminology that they're using, or anti-white racism. And basically what that means is if any entity, organization has a policy or action that is perceived to unfairly favor minorities at the expense of white individuals, this is the language that they are using. So it's kind of like reversing civil rights. And basically what the project is arguing is that diversity, equity, inclusion programs, anything that is working toward what many citizens believe as equitable, fair, and accessible treatment could go out the window. It's so important because we're already seeing this. We don't even have the conservative president in office, and we're seeing what happens when the Supreme Court is involved in reversing. So these things can happen. So that's why this is such an important document to pay attention to. What could happen is the DOJ would then start prosecuting state and local government institutions of higher learning, corporations, private employers that have DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs, affirmative action programs, and they will use to justify this the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we know was created so that people who have been historically discriminated against, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, it's really like reversing that to turn it back onto, if you're helping people because of their race that have been unfairly treated or underrepresented, we can now prosecute you, and they're going to cite it under disparate treatment. Last but not least, presidential immunity. So we already know that there has been attempts to go to the court to basically say, hey, whatever a president does, criminal or not, while they're in their office as president, they're going to be immune to. And so what this project is basically lifting up and standing up the agencies that if a president were to operate currently right now, if a president were to operate outside of the law, Department of Justice could come after them. By, again, shifting the focus of the department, it's securing basically that presidential immunity and executive authority without any check and balance. And so the last thing I'll say, because it dovetails into the healthcare piece here, is that there's a, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Comstock Act. So basically they hope to revive that. And basically the DOJ could enforce or prosecute the Postal Service for transporting medicine to people for abortion. Remember when COVID happened, we received the tests in the mail, basically saying the U.S. Postal Service can't use their services to transport certain access to healthcare material, and it can't be delivered by mail. So again, further hindering, especially in the rural areas where access to clinics and things like that, pharmacies, if you don't have transportation yourself, is difficult. So in closing, I know you probably want to know, what is it that we can do to pretty much stop this? In order for this project to go into effect, the Conservative Party would have to have control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So that means when you go to vote, you need to make sure that you're not voting at the top of the ticket only. You need to be voting for your congressional representatives, because those are the entities that confirm our Supreme Court folks, that confirm the people that will be sitting at these agencies and will be voting on policies that come down the pipe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Crystal Francis, for that. Okay, we're going to move on. Next, we're going to have Dr. Khalilah Harris, and she's going to speak to us about the Department of Education and education policy. Welcome, Dr. Khalilah.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you. So I'm going to try to ensure that this is accessible and people have some tangible next steps, piggyback on some of the things that these amazing women have said already. And I just want to make sure that we understand what's at stake. So I want to give a brief overview of just 4 points about what Project 2025 does. And I will also say I'm not speaking on behalf of any other entity. I am bringing my own expertise. And I thank you for your time this evening. I want to thank the 5-Star Women of Color also for having me. This is an amazing discussion, and I know many people are asking about Project 2025 and what it means. So CBS describes Project 2025 as a proposed presidential transition project that is composed of four pillars. And as Dr. Crystal said, every president, every new executive, your governor, your mayor will have a transition plan. The 4 pillars of this plan rightfully are a policy guide for the next presidential administration, so throughout their presidential administration, a LinkedIn-style database of personnel who could serve in the next administration. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I served at the U.S. Office of Personnel, both during the Obama and the Biden administrations. It would be a training for the pool of candidates that they put in that database to be able to take roles in the executive branch called the Presidential Administration Academy. And it will offer a playbook of actions for the first 180 days of a presidency. And let me just say the Heritage Foundation, as Ms. Betty said earlier at the top of the session, The Heritage Foundation actually had a plan during the Reagan administration. They are not new to this, they are true to this. This plan called Project 2025 has already begun being implemented. Let me say this Project 2025 has already begun being implemented across the 50 states and the US territories. So if you think this is something that you only need to focus on the presidential election around, you would be mistaken. The fact of the matter is our school boards are being populated by people who are subscribing to Project 2025. You will be surprised about the amount of dollars that are dumped into school board elections, and how school boards have been a training ground for people to take on other elected roles, whether it be on city councils, county councils, state legislatures. So it is really, really critical that people vote up and down the ballot. When you hear people saying, I don't want to vote for any of these people. I didn't like Biden and I don't like Kamala. I don't want to vote for Trump. Maybe I'll write someone in, or maybe I just won't go vote. The fact of the matter is the most critical way to get people engaged in elections is to talk about local politics and the impact of them on their local and state level. The federal government is critical, but there are so many things that the federal government is not completely responsible for at the local level, including education, right? The way that the Department of Education engages with our local communities is by giving grants and regulating the civil rights of children and families. Giving grants, giving money, and regulating the civil rights of children and families. It is not the case that the federal government decides what curriculum our students are learning. It is not the case that the federal government hires teachers. That is your local and state government. And so it's important for us to not get caught up. I said this to Michael in the chat as well, whether it's called Project 2025, whether it's called Agenda 47, whether it's called Blue's Clues or Gracie's Corner. We need to be focused on the fact that they have plans in place, and these plans get built out decades before we begin to see them. So it's important for us to be civically engaged and active so that we are building out a platform and a strategy. And this sometimes is a challenge on the left. Sometimes people are unclear or don't know what to say our platform is. What are we for as opposed to what we're against? And it's important in the policy landscape that we understand there are 4 phases of policy. Oftentimes, Black folk and non-white folk tend to get involved at the protest phase. We need to be involved at the beginning phase of policy development. Anybody can go to their local elected, whether it's the mayor or city council or state legislature, and say, I would like to see a bill that does X, Y, or Z and have that pass. So let me first talk about the executive branch and what the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. People think that the U.S. Office of Personnel Management hires the 2 million federal workforce. It does not. It sets the human resource policies for the federal workforce. The Project 2025 plan would seek to eliminate the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So if there is not an agency that's overseeing human resource policies, that means it becomes a whole lot easier to do something we call Schedule F. Schedule F would wipe out around 50,000 civil service jobs in the federal government, allowing for people to be placed in those jobs who are favorable as appointees to the sitting president. Let me say that again, 50,000 positions would no longer be filled by civil servants, meaning they have certain protections, they have certain union rights, that they cannot just be terminated at the will of the president. Those would become appointees. I served as an appointee again in the Obama administration and as an appointee in the Biden administration, which meant I served at the pleasure of the president. And when a new president comes into office, you no longer have that job. What the Project 2025 plan would say is when a new president comes in office, they can now fill roles with a database they've been collecting of people who are loyal to that administration, which means they would move policies through that would create or eliminate regulations that really have served as protections that the general public does not actually interact with on a day-to-day. You may not know of a regulation that says, okay, you need to make sure that there is proper pay for our seasonal firefighters so that they're not living in poverty when there's no fire season. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management sets that policy and says, nope, we are now going to ensure that those people have a livable wage year round, so that because of climate change and when we have fire season, firefighters for the federal government will have a livable wage. They would eliminate the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. And in fact, when I went into the Biden administration and served as the chief of staff at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, I will say people felt demoralized because they had already begun the process. And the author of Project 2025 is the person who served as the director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management in the Trump administration. So those things connect. And I'm moving quickly because I want to make sure we get to Sister Winky as well. But you know, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, again, is an agency that people are not quite familiar with, but it does a ton. The U.S. government has the largest workforce in the country, 2 million people. That does not include civilians who work for that does not include rather our armed forces. So there are about 4 million federal employees included in the armed forces. 2 million of them are civilians, and they fall under the policy set at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. That is critical. Those people in those roles allow for no president to come in office and willy-nilly make rules that will change our lives deeply. When we ask about Social Security, when we ask about the CDC, it is that agency and those people in those roles who are creating regulations to make sure all citizens are protected. That includes themselves. And when you think about things like, is this not going to impact their people? When we think about capitalism, and we think about the 1%, the rules are not being made for everyday people. The rules are made so that people who don't have as much are seeming to be in a battle for very few scarce resources, when in fact, the United States of America has lots of resources. But there's this mindset of somebody else is coming to steal from you. Somebody else is coming to take from you. Look away, don't look at the man behind the green curtain. Look at those people. They are trying to take something from you. And it's not until things like Roe versus Wade is overturned that you have people who are in conservative states and normally vote red overwhelmingly say, whoa, 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 whoa. You are taking something from me and mine, my daughters, my nieces, my aunts, my mothers. And you saw in the midterms for them not go very well because people were like, well, this immediately impacts me. You're not going to do that. Department of Education is sought to be broken up and to allow for people to take money from taxpayer dollars and pay for their children to go to schools. If you have any connectivity to Brown v. Board or what was happening during the civil rights movement with education, you saw states like Virginia, where Virginia's government would not open school for 5 years to avoid desegregating their schools, right? And so you saw people who would put ballot measures in, and you do still see this now in the US, to change the zip codes where the schools that they like only are able to be attended by people in their community. So they will start a whole new school district inside of or adjacent to an existing school district to resegregate and make sure children from families with fewer resources don't have access. We already see this to some extent in movements where, you know, in the state of Maryland, we saw a big push for resources to go for families to be able to access vouchers, right? It feels good to say we're going to give vouchers to families so that they can supplement their Catholic school education. We're going to give vouchers to families who maybe are going to schools that have not been serving children so that they can go to a private school that's better serving them. When the likelihood is if your family has fewer resources, you're never going to get a voucher for $38,000. It's middle class and upper middle income families who are going to be able to access that. So let me ask you a question. If that is good for our public education system, should people be able to cash out their police dollars because the police don't serve their community? Should people be able to cash out their sanitation dollars because they don't think their sanitation system is effective enough? That's the same logic. So if we have public services and public good that are paid for by taxes, the idea that you can cash that money out and pay for the schools that you want to, and what we used to call them were sunshine academies and segregation academies. We all want our children to go over here. We don't want them in school with your children. right? And so we had a number of states who were under consent decrees and had to be taken, had to go through the federal courts to be able to get out of those decrees because they were segregated, because they were allowing families to move out of the district and take their tax-paying dollars to pay for those schools. Things like Title I would be eliminated. Title I right now is not perfect. Unfortunately, 90+% of schools get access to Title I dollars, so it's not concentrated in the way it was intended for schools with families with fewer resources, but they would completely eliminate Title I under Project 2025. That would mean there would be schools just like in Prince George's County, Wacomico County, don't get it twisted, it's not just Baltimore City, other places in the state of Maryland where they would lose teachers because Title I supplemental dollars allows them to have more educators in the building to fill the needs of families who have fewer resources. And those families also pay taxes. So it's not like we're giving to people who haven't earned the right for their children to have a good education. Zip code should not be able to determine your capacity to achieve in life. And right now, without Title I, that would be a huge impact across this country, including in enclaves that are homogeneous in terms of race, Appalachia, rural communities, those communities would be impacted too. The last thing I'll say is I am currently working in policing reform. Project 2025 would seek to eliminate the Department of Homeland Services. We know DHS was established after 9/11 in 2001, and it would eliminate the largest training program that is in existence for law enforcement. That training program trains on de-escalation with community. That training program trains on ensuring there are women in law enforcement. That training program focuses on counterterrorism. So they are proposing to eliminate the entire Department of Homeland Security. These are things that we should be worried about, but let's be clear, and I'm going to close on this. We don't need to just worry about a Trump administration. These policies are being implemented in states across the country, and we need to pay attention and vote up and down the ballot. And dare I say, whether or not you are going to cast a vote for president, cast a vote for your state legislature, cast a vote for your local city and county legislatures, because these are policies that are being slowly but surely implemented. If we're worried about the Supreme Court, you should know that there are many, many federal appointments that did not go through until Trump got into office. And therefore, at the lower court levels, there are a number of very conservative judges who are overturning laws, who are putting barriers up, who allowed for a president who committed treason to no longer be tried based on the laws that he broke. And so let's not rest on our laurels and just say, oh, we got to make sure that he's not president in 2025. We need to make sure we're paying attention in every election. There is data out there that shows that overall Black folk are registered to vote. Black folk are registered to vote. Don't get it twisted. Yes, we need to ensure that people who are formerly incarcerated also have access to the ballot because they have served their time. But Black folk are registered to vote. The challenge is turning them out to vote. Make a plan, take your cousin and them, your daughter, if you got college students, make sure your college students have a plan to either have their absentee registration, to vote at college if that's their plan, but make sure they have a plan. Make sure your 17 and 18-year-olds who are in high school right now are registered if they're eligible to vote on November 5th. Let's cease and desist of the prosecutor versus the felon. Because if your cousin and them can vote and deserves a second chance, then that's not the mantra we need to use, because we're alienating pieces of our family in our village, okay? We're alienating pieces of our family in our village. So I like to say the prosecutor versus the traitor, because that's what he is. And according to the US Constitution, you cannot run for president or be president if you are treasonous. But that conversation about felon language is important. Let's not alienate our brothers and sisters who are in a racist society that is based on genocide and enslavement, that have put us in positions for a couple of centuries that results in low resources flowing to our communities unfairly and may cause some of them unjustly even to be felons, okay? These are people who are formerly incarcerated. So let's watch our language, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. So lastly, but not least, we are going to have Danyell Winkey-Smith. She's going to give us a recap and call to action. And once she's finished, there are multiple questions that have come in from the registration. So we're going to answer some of those. So without further ado, please proceed, Dr. Danyell Smith. Ms. Smith.
Okay, woo, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say, who these women were phenomenal. You have gotten a load. Now you know why it is important to vote and vote down ballot. My name is Danyell Winkey-Smith. I am a member of Black Women for Positive Change, Win with Black Women, Sister Lead, Sister Vote, Black Women's Roundtable, and a host of other organizations. I am so excited to be here, and I am speaking in my personal opinion. And those of us in these other organizations, you know, we have some of the similarities. Thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. This Zoom call is all about making sure that we do what our communities have done for generations, and that is sharing information and ensuring that we are informed and educated voters. Our ancestors have fought for years to have the privilege to vote, and if our vote really didn't count, why do you think so many individuals fight so hard to suppress it, i.e. over 300 and something voter suppression laws already going on? Our vote is truly our voice and our power. And the quote, a new phrase now, our vote is our new Black job. So with that being said, we must remember that policy is the cornerstone of our democracy. The 2025 project is deeply concerning because it seeks to reconstruct foundational policies, decisions, and federal services to restrict freedoms, prohibit inclusivity, and promote an extreme conservative construct. Its ultimate goal is to concentrate power to a select few in this country. We must build upon the legacy of our ancestors who stepped up front during Reconstruction, who ushered through the Civil Rights Act, and were intentional about building a movement, because that's what we're in right now. We're in a movement to preserve our freedoms and rights due process. It is important that we inform and educate ourselves to what those plans are and how they affect us directly and indirectly as a democracy. You have just heard how the Heritage Foundation is responsible for putting together a detailed guide, policy agenda that lists specific recommendations on how the government should operate under the leadership of former President Donald Trump. And you've also just heard that individuals, what some of the young ladies just said, how some of this is already in process, how they're already interviewing, and the skill set that most need for these federal positions, which are over 50,000 individuals, is that you support what the MAGA portion is doing right now. You support all of these extreme conservative values. So my purpose and objective today is regarding understanding Project 2025 is to make sure that we equip ourselves with the resources that we need in order to be informed and educated voters. So my call to action is for us to get together and inform our family, our friends, our communities. And one way of doing this, which was already mentioned, is that we need to, well, I have a set of videos, and I don't know if Dr. Crystal Francis has, or if she's able to do it, that explains in layman terms Project 2025. It is a little under 8 minutes, and these are very important. There's another one that's explained by a Yale Law grad. And what I like about these is that it's a 1,000-page document. So this goes directly to things and how they affect us directly and indirectly. It also, there's a video. So this is 3 videos. One of the videos is done by a young man by the name of Yellow Payne, who is an actor who talks about a lot of things that are going on in our country and communities. And I think it came out in 2020. But what he does is he talks about the executive branch. So the 3 branches of government: the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And this is important, as was already stated, is that We can't just worry about voting for the president. We have to go down the line. We need to vote because this next president will also be responsible for putting 2 Supreme Court justices on the bench. We also have to make sure that our legislators get to vote on these bills, because a lot of times, like someone said, starting back during the Tea Party and Obama era, a lot of things were sitting at the table because a certain individual was making sure that they didn't get passed. So we need to vote down the ballot and make sure you get your legislators in, which is Congress, your senators, and your congressmen and women. Make sure you get all of them in. And then another call to action. And I thought this was important because although we think that a lot of people know this, there are so many people, and it doesn't matter what their socioeconomic status is. It doesn't matter, how much money they make, their educational level. A lot of people don't know because they're too busy living their lives, raising their kids. And a lot of people are not looking at the MSNBCs, the CNNs, or Fox News. They're just not doing it. So they depend on people like ourselves who are advocates to make sure we get this information out. And that's one thing that we have a legacy in our communities of doing, is sharing information. Also, another call to action is to make sure everyone that you know has a voting plan. Check your voter registration status. Make sure your name is correct. Make sure your address is correct, just in case you move. And also know what your voting precincts are, what your location is. Make sure you register to vote if you're not registered to vote. If you have a family member who's registered to vote. I've been talking to different people across the country who are, for the first time, are actually going to vote. That happened also during the era when President Obama was in. There were people in their 80s, 90s, 40s, 50s, all ages, who it was their first time to vote. And it looks like right now people are getting the energy because of all of the things, and a lot of them who have heard about 2025, they're coming out and know that their voice is power. Also, know about your early voting and the general election dates and locations. Also, if you are going to be traveling on vacation, if you're traveling with your job, or if you are a student or you have college students, kids who are in school away, make sure they get those absentee ballots in and those mail-in ballots. Also, you have to check the dates because they are dates that, where they close, where you can't get them, and also dates that they have to be returned and sent in. And last, I just want to do another little overview of some things that are also part of 2025. The highlights: establish a new DOJ that will work for the POTUS rather than remain independent, which was already stated. Allow individuals to sue if Blacks, females, and LGBTQ hires get a job, benefits over them, thus doing away with DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which was also talked about. Eliminate the Department of Education, eliminate FDA, terminate careers of federal government employees, basically purging, which their only skill set they need to have is that they support the far right agenda. To dissolve the Social Security benefits and other pensions, to get rid of Medicare and Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, to eliminate public journalism such as the VOA, which is the Voice of America, which is an international radio broadcasting station. So, that freedom of speech will be gone too. We may only have one TV station. People need to know what autocracy versus a democracy means, because a lot of people don't know what it means. Allow the GOP to place the FBI under its umbrella, stop online misinformation and investigations, suppress voters' rights, especially in mail-in voting. Again, eliminate Affordable Care Act, which some people call Obamacare. Allow the U.S. to pull out of NATO, which this is very important too, because we need our allies. As a lot of you just seen on TV how it was important to bring back a lot of prisoners who were unjustly held for no reason at all. And several different countries joined us. And expand the Geneva Consensus Declaration using pro-family posturing to deny women's rights and women's health care. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to give me to share this. This call of action was to inform for you to inform and educate our families. We all need to get to work. This is an all hands on deck, regardless of your party affiliation, regardless of the color of your skin. This is our duty, and this is all of our job to vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. At this time, Nikita, just to be respectful of time, I do want to ask, I think there's one question that you were going to ask, but we do want to honor the questions that have been put in the chat, and there were a lot of questions that were submitted with the registration. So we are going to get those questions answered by the experts on the call, and we will email those out to all who is attending. So Nikita, if you can ask your question real quick.
So there was a question that came in early, and I think this kind of sums it up. It says, why is it important that we know and understand anything about Project 25? You know, why should we care? So I would pose that to any of the panelists who would like to answer that. Yes, Dr. Harris.
Thank you so much. And let me just restate again. Project 2025 is not just about the next presidential administration. It is permeating at local, state levels of government as well. It is critical that we both ensure the Senate is flipped to legislators who are in line with our politics. It is important that we ensure that the House of Representatives is also balanced in a direction that will allow us to move legislation, because there's been a blockage. But at state and local government levels, we are seeing, from school board to city council and county councils, we are seeing vestiges of Project 2025 moving throughout our governments. And, you know, a lot of times people are like, I'm just trying to make it. I'm just trying to live day to day. I live in Baltimore City. And we had a governor who lots of folk who look like us were more than willing to put into office in 2 different administrations, because he helped their tax base. He helped their bottom line with no real consideration of how he was creating policies that did not take care of the least of us. And really making sure we don't pay more taxes. If that's all we're worried about, we have a bigger problem, right? And so we can't just take the kinder and gentler conservative over the raging conservative. We really need to be more thoughtful about how we take care of ourselves. They say, you know, they came for the Jews and I did nothing. And then they came for the Muslims and I did nothing. And then there was nobody to take care of me when they came for me and mine. And we have to be much more cognizant of that, because Project 2025 is not just about the presidential election. And we need to be vigilant, particularly for those of us in the state of Maryland. We are a some days blue, some days red state, if we are honest with ourselves, right? When you go from the eastern part of the state to the western part of the state, it's like you live in 2 different worlds. It's like you're in the multiverse. So it is important for us to take heed of these, because sometimes these things will pop up in our local jurisdictions and not be called Project 2025. And we're thinking, oh, this is something that these particular conservatives just came up with, or these moderates who are not labeled conservatives came up with, and not understand it was a part of the plan. Just because something doesn't have a label on it doesn't mean it's not doing the same thing. So I'll stop there. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to speak to that question? Dr. Harris did a great job. Okay. No. So hearing that, we have a survey, and Khalilah Nyanza can speak a little bit more about that.
Thank you. So first of all, let me just say thank you to all of the speakers that were on here tonight. We truly appreciate, from 5-Star Women of Color, you coming on, sharing this information with us, taking time out of your busy schedule to help educate everyone on understanding Project 2025. To our guests who actually are attending tonight, we want to thank you for attending. We actually have a survey that we want you to complete, just to kind of give us feedback on if this call was informative, if it was helpful. So Makita's put that in the chat. So we're asking for everyone to fill that out. Click
Can I
that.
say one thing? Excuse
Sure.
me. The survey, when I click on it through Zoom, it does say that it's suspicious. It takes you out of Zoom to the actual 5-Star Women of 5-Star website.
Okay.
That's why it saying it's suspicious. So I just wanted to speak to that. But you can click visit and it'll go to our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're just asking everybody if you could take a moment to click on that, fill it out. Also, there will be a follow-up email with any questions that weren't answered on the call. You also have an opportunity at that point to complete the survey if you're not able to do that right now. And again, we just want to personally thank everyone who's on the call, whether you were a panelist or whether you were a guest listening. We truly appreciate your time tonight. And with that, we want to respect everyone's time and say thank you. And look out for future workshops, events that 5 Star Women of Color are doing. So have a great evening, everyone. Good night.